Good afternoon, and welcome to the Center for Online and Continuing Education's professional development session for today. We are wrapping up another quite unique semester, and once we all take a breather, we'll be starting to think about the spring semester. So it is indeed a pleasure for me to share with you Tanya Goldberg with her session on rubrics. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Tanya Goldberg, and I'm an instructional designer here at the Center for Online and Continuing Education. So today we're going to talk about rubrics, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is going to be a very, casual presentation. I invite you all to please participate and share any insights or experiences or tips that you may have. And I also invite my colleagues who are on the call to join in at any moment that they feel is necessary. All right. So I do have a panelist with me, Dr. Abigail Perkins. She'll be sharing just a couple insights here and there in between my presentation. So just listen out for that. So what will we discuss today? We're going to discuss what rubrics are, why you should use them, and how to design a quality rubric. And then I'll go over a couple helpful resources that I came across. So what I always like to do in these presentations is, have my participants participate in the presentation by answering some questions. 88% of you use rubrics for some or maybe most of your assessments, and then 11% of you do not. So let's go on to the next one. Next one, what assessments do you mainly use your rubrics for? So discussion boards. So this is going to be like a word cloud. So maybe, well, it looks like only one person's responded so far. Well, there we go. Papers and presentations, group assignments, group presentations. These are all good assessments to use rubrics for. All of them except exams. Okay. And you could potentially use a rubric in an exam if there was like an essay question, if you wanted to, if you thought it was necessary. Okay. So we'll move on to the last question. What type of rubric is your go-to? Do you usually use a holistic type of a rubric or an analytical type of a rubric? Or maybe you use a combination, or maybe none at all. So it looks like mostly it's a combination. 40% of you use mainly, oh, it just changed drastically. Okay, so 71% use a combination, 29 use analytical, looks like 0 use holistic. Okay.
Okay, but I'm going to change that, Tanya. Although I don't have the Slido open, but I like holistics. I do combination, but I really prefer holistics.
You prefer holistic. Okay. Well, I'll invite you later on when we're going over the differences to explain why you prefer a holistic. I would like to know why that's your preference. All right, so what are rubrics? So rubrics are assessment tools for faculty. They're used for grading and they're used for communication. So you could give your students a very detailed and descriptive feedback by using rubrics. So in that manner, it's both a communication and a grading tool. And then they're also learning tools for students. It gives the students the ability to self-reflect and to evaluate themselves. And it's also a great tool to use for peer evaluation. So I found this definition of a rubric, and a rubric is an articulated set of criteria that communicates the learning goal expectations of a specific learning activity and assessment in a course. Okay, so what do students want to know? They want to know where they're going, where they are, and how can they close that gap. And we could give this as information by clearly stating the learning goals and success criteria, and by providing that descriptive feedback that I was speaking about earlier. So this is an example that I like to use that I got from my colleague and mentor, Maria Rotundo. She actually did a PD in the past on rubrics, and she used an example. I believe it was a chocolate chip cookie recipe example. And it kind of got me thinking about how you could kind of compare a rubric to like a recipe. So in this example, if I were to ask you all to bake me a chocolate chip cookie, but I don't give you a recipe, I don't give you any details, I don't give you any directions, the result of that would probably be what you see here in the images. All these different looking types of cookies with different textures. Some are thicker, some are thinner, some are chewy, some are crispy. And maybe none of those are my favorite cookie, and that's not what I wanted, right? But I didn't give you those details of what it is that I really like and how to do it. So that's one aspect of it. Then the other aspect would be, okay, I ask you to bake me a chocolate chip cookie, but I just give you the list of ingredients and I don't tell you how much of each ingredient or how to put them together. Or again, do I want it to be crispy? Do I want it to be, almost burnt, or do I want it to be super chewy and like just done? And all of that really matters when your assessment is something that is specific, right? That you're looking for this specific outcome. It's very important for you to be specific in those criteria for your students so they could um, produce that uh, great assessment that you're looking for, right? So if I were to ask you to bake me a cookie, but I wanted you to bake me the specific cookie that I wanted, the best bet would be for me to create a cookie rubric. So how do I want my cookie to appear? How do I want it to taste? What is the texture going to be? I could break that down by the different performance levels and give those performance levels points. And in that way, my learners or my bakers will know exactly what they have to do in order to produce a cookie that I will be satisfied with, that I'll give them a good grade for. Okay, so there's two different types of rubrics, and we kind of touched over this a little bit earlier: holistic and analytical. Dr. Judy Summers mentioned that she really likes holistic rubrics more than analytical. So holistic rubrics are when you have an assessment that you want to score more as a whole, right? So you're not scoring the different parts of the process separately. You're not judging those components separately. You're judging the end result. So it's not so important if maybe somewhere along the way of that assessment, the student didn't do too great, but maybe at the end, they did amazing. That end result that they turn in was great. So these are the type of rubrics that you want to use when it's just the end result that really matters, and not so much all the different steps to get to that end result. They usually consist of a single scale of criteria. So it's not going to have all the different levels of criteria as a analytical rubric would, and it's not going to have as much descriptors. It'll be more a whole description instead of a broken down description, and I'll kind of show you examples later on. All right, so typically, yeah, I already said that they're typically summative in nature, right? And they can typically be quicker to create and also for grading purposes. And then analytical rubrics, they score or judge each part of the project, right? So maybe there's a research project that you're going to assign to your students, and you want them to come up with a research question. You have a specific formatting that you want them to use. Maybe they have to work in a group. And so each part of that research paper project is really important. And so you're going to want to judge or score each part of that assessment, right? Also, analytical rubrics are going to provide uh, way more details and descriptors than would a holistic rubric. They definitely could be more time consuming to create. So you have to put a lot more initial work into it, but it could also provide so much more beneficial feedback to your students, and it could be much a better tool for the students to evaluate themselves to see where it is that they might have gone wrong. Um, so, Dr. Summers, I invite you to explain why is it that you like holistic rubrics more than analytical ones?
Well, there are a number of reasons. I do tend to have more than a single criteria, but I do not, I prefer not to use the various performance levels within the criteria. I want to see the overview of whatever that particular part is, component. And also, I don't like the idea in doing in performance levels. I don't like the idea of focusing on the negative aspects as you go down the performance level list. I prefer to look at it, and with that type of a rubric, I can do it's a range of points for that. So I can put in which point level I feel like they earn, and then put in the comment section why why that grade was that. So that's my rationale.
Right. So you use the comment section and you kind of give a little extra feedback in the comment section.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it can also be used as formative along the way too.
Right. Yes. All right. So here's an example of a holistic rubric. This would be for like an oral report. As you could see, it has, three criteria. It does have the performance, or sorry, it has, excuse me, it has the one criteria only here, but it does have the performance levels that Dr. Summers was saying. She doesn't really like to put these, performance indicators in here too much. Um, it also does break it down by points, but if you notice, all of the details are kind of just grouped in that one section. And you're going to notice the difference now when I show you the next one, which is the analytical rubric example. And so if you notice here, it's kind of broken down into these different sections. So there's the factual information, use of visual, speaking for presentation. It still has the performance level indicators and it still has points, but maybe just a little bit more detail. And also it's that, like I said in the beginning, it's that you're actually grading each part. Each part of this is getting a point or some type of a grade of the assessment, while in the holistic, it's the overall grade. Okay, so rubrics are great tools for providing feedback to students. As Dr. Summers was saying, you could use in your rubrics, there's sometimes you could write free-form comments. And it's always a good idea to do that if you feel like maybe criteria maybe is a little vague and you want to maybe specify a little bit more to the student why it was that they didn't maybe get the full points for that specific criteria. Okay, and then so why do we use rubrics? So rubrics help to eliminate bias in scoring procedure and reduce subjectivity. So the more detailed you are and the more explicit you are in what it is that you're wanting from your students, it knows the students will know what it is that's expected of them, and it'll reduce that bias that they might sometimes think that is happening there. It provides a measurement system. Again, it helps to demystify the grades. It could create consistency in grading. So if you maybe have TAs, or if it's, maybe you and another instructor teaching a course and you both have the same assessments and you want to use the same rubric, it'll create that consistency between your grades and the other instructor's grades or your TAs. It provides timely and detailed feedback to students, which could help them improve. So in that sense, it's a learning tool for students. And in that same vein, it could create intrinsic motivation. So when a student gets back their rubric and then there's all this detailed feedback and they could see, what they did great and maybe where they need to improve, it could create this motivation to do better, because, oh, I did so great and there was just a couple things that I missed here and I know that the next time I could do it, and they're going to be motivated to do it better the next time. And then it also provides a great opportunity for peer and self assessment. So you could use rubrics when you're having your students do peer evaluations. There's a way to set that up in Canvas through groups. Here's a couple of benefits and challenges to using rubrics. So a couple of them we've already talked about a bunch throughout the presentation. Um, but what I wanted to talk a little bit about here was some of the challenges. So yes, they could become time consuming to develop. But again, as I mentioned, once you've developed it and you've put that initial work, it's something that you could reuse and you could make better. So you could tweak it. So you could see where maybe you need to be more detailed, or maybe some criteria could be merged into one column instead of 5 columns. And you could also provide, the rubrics to your students and ask them for feedback and see where maybe they could help out in creating the rubrics, and seeing where there's maybe some misunderstandings happening. Another big theme that I came across in the research for this presentation was that there are some thoughts that rubrics could hinder creativity. So it's really important to think about the assessment that you're using the rubric for, and is it even an assessment that's worth using a rubric for? So if you, for example, had like a creative writing assignment or something where you really want the students to kind of just, be very creative, think out of the box, a rubric might not be the best tool for that assessment. So, kind of thinking about like what is the objectives is like really where you want to start when you're thinking about, is this correct for a rubric or not? Okay, so rubric. If I knew how to design a rubric, would I look this frazzled? Okay, so how do we design a quality rubric? If you're wanting students to be creative and think out of the box, and you're not really wanting to be specific with what it is that you want because you want to see where it is that they could take it, maybe a rubric's not your best choice. I'm not sure if all of my colleagues agree with me on that, and if you don't, chime in and let me know. And then you also want to begin with your objectives. So is this going to be an assessment that is a capstone project? Is this going to run the whole course of your course? Is it an assessment that's just specific to a module? So you want to think about your course objectives and your module objectives and use those as you're creating your rubric, to help you create the criteria. You want to kind of stay between 3 to 7 criteria. Any more than 7 is going to be very overwhelming for both yourself and your students. And again, so start small and expand as necessary. So as I was saying, if this is a assessment that you're going to use over and over, once you've created that rubric and you've put in that initial work, you could either expand later on, reduce. You have that ability to now really make that rubric be a great tool for both yourself and your students. Okay, what else? Use descriptors and be specific. So when you have your criteria, you don't always have to use descriptors. I think that you should use descriptors because it really breaks it down to what is it that you're expecting from your students. And the more specific, I think, the better. So another thing that I kind of wanted to talk about in this presentation was my own experience as a student. So since high school to undergraduate and graduate, I had always learned in different modalities. So I had, face-to-face learning, I had some flex learning, and I had some fully online or correspondence. I actually did my last 2 years of high school as correspondence. So they would send me books and I would do them and I would send it back in the mail. And one of the last courses that I took for my graduate was a health science course, and I had to do this qualitative research project. And I had never before heard of qualitative research. It was the first time I had ever heard this word, and I didn't know anything about it. And I was provided with a rubric for this assignment, but this rubric was so vague and it didn't have any details. And all it did was stress me out more because I spent the most of my course researching what qualitative research was, trying to figure out what it was so that I could produce, a quality assignment, which in the end I did. I did great on it, but I felt like it was such unnecessary stress put on me. And I feel like I could have done probably a lot better had I had more guidance. If I had had, an example of a great research paper previous, or if I had a really detailed rubric, that would have been super helpful for me. And I think it would have helped me actually learn more because I wouldn't have been spending all this extra time stressing and trying to figure out what is being asked of me.
Tanya, may
Uh,
I chime in with that?
yes, please.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that story about having experience with qualitative research and a desire to have a quality rubric. One resource that may be helpful are resources that are already out there. There are example rubrics in various literature that are published, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to post one source. This is what I'm posting here. I will also explain verbally, and this is for two Cures rubrics examples. What's Cures? Course-based undergraduate research experience. Those in the sciences might be familiar with these. If your course is already listed as a Cures, or you are interested in adopting and implementing Cures-like pedagogy into your course, this is a great way to begin that progression, utilizing rubrics for, say, laboratory reports. And these tend to be more analytical. The two examples that you can find in the reference that's in the chat, this is by Bakshi, Patrick, and Wishun, a framework for implementing course-based undergraduate research experiences in freshman biology labs. And that link will take you to their article. Also, you can Google Scholar the title that I just said. If you scroll down to the bottom, there are two supplemental resources that are rubrics. One is for a poster, one is for writing. And within both, there are different specificities and there are different levels amongst each item. So for the writing, there are, as is standard for most lab reports, the introduction, the research question, methods, style and flow, results, and discussion. So these help the students become familiar with what is it like to participate in the scientific community. And this is an iterative process. At the very beginning, for the first few lab reports, there might be a learning curve, and then once the semester gets rolling, the students are able tend to have an ability to apply this type of expression and writing and thinking to published articles and see that connection there to be able to participate in a scientific community as well as build a scientific identity. This is not just limited to the sciences. The concept of a methodological framework and research is applicable to political science, economics, public administration. So these examples that I put in the chat can be applied to any domain. Really, just having some starting points as guideposts can be very helpful for those analytical rubrics that may take a little bit more time to develop. So you don't have to develop them from scratch. You can stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Perkins. That was wonderful. So there's a couple of resources that Dr. Perkins went ahead and put in the chat if you guys want to check that out. Use Rubrics. That was great. Thank you so much. Okay. So what else? So language from column to column is similar. So basically, if in one column you're talking about let's just use sources as an example. Maybe not the best example, but that's the one I'm going to use. So say in the first, in your excellent column, you want your students to use 5 reliable sources. And that's, that's where they're going to get the most points. You want to make sure that in the next following columns that that language is being repeated, right? That you're not leaving that out, that descriptor doesn't appear in some columns and then disappear in others. Oh, and I guess that was actually the next one, not the one I was just talking about. So language from column to column is similar. You just want to make sure that that the language that you're using in your rubrics flows through each column and that you're not, again, leaving out any of those indicators. And also that the language is learning level appropriate, right? We're not going to use any type of words or anything like that that the learner would completely not understand and get stressed out like I did with my rubric. All right. So effective feedback for students starts with positive comments, is returned in a timely manner, and aligns to the learning goals and success criteria. So the starts with the positive comments kind of touches on what Dr. Summers was just saying, that she really prefers these kind of holistic rubrics because they're more positive. That is another theme that I did see come that sometimes rubrics could tend to be written in a negative manner, and sometimes they could hinder the student's success if they're written that way, because you might get frustrated and just give up, like, oh, I can't do this, I'm not, and give up. So when you're designing your rubrics, really try to think of making it positive. So instead of describing what they didn't do, describe what they did do. Um, what else? And then here's some resources. These are some resources that I came across as I was preparing this presentation. These first 3 ones are links to these rubric generators. So let's go to one of them so they could check it out. See if I could bring this over. Can you see this? Or are you still seeing just my presentation? Abigail, can anybody chime in?
We do
Yes,
see you.
we see
We
Ruby
do see
Star.
it. Yes.
You
Thank
see
you,
it? Okay,
Tanya.
Rubastar. Okay, thank you. All right, so basically this, and these resources that I've listed are all free resources. You don't have to worry about, paying for anything for this. But basically, there's some templates that you could use. Um, it's all laid out for you here. So for example, you could type in your own criteria if you want, or there's a couple ones that you could choose from here. So let's say you were using one where you had sources, right? And one of your criteria is quality of sources. It like pre-fills out these columns for you with, some information that you may or may not want to use. But I think it's really a great resource if you're trying to build a rubric and you just really don't know where to start and you kind of need some help. You could come check this out and look at the different criteria that they already have pre-laid out for you, how it is that they describe each one of those. And you could come in here and make edits as needed. So you could add more details, you could remove details, you could change the points. And then just use this kind of like as a template for then creating your rubric in Canvas, right? I'm not sure if everybody uses, Canvas LMS for their assignments. Maybe many of you teach face-to-face, and so maybe you would be developing these rubrics in a different manner and not putting them on Canvas. And if that's the case, then you could just use it from here, and I believe you could just print it out from here. I don't want to give you wrong information. I actually didn't create a rubric completely in here, so I will, in my follow-up email, confirm how exactly the end product of this looks. But so this is one of them. I thought it was really cool because, again, it already kind of has like these filled in criterias that you can use if you'd like. And then there was a couple other ones. There was a rubric maker and Teachnology. They're the same thing. They're generators, but they didn't have so much like already templated um, criteria. They did have templates of complete rubrics that you could maybe use if you'd like. Um, I don't know if someone was trying to chime in there for a second. I heard something. Okay, no. All right, so, and then the last thing would be Canvas guides for rubrics. So in Canvas, you could create a rubric and you could put, your point values, you could put down your descriptors and everything and grade right within the rubric. So it makes your grading very easy. It goes right into your grade book in Canvas, and then you could actually add more comments if you'd like through the speed grader. So if you want to maybe kind of just give a little bit more feedback, a little bit more explanation, you could do that through the speed grader in Canvas. I put the link there for the guides for rubrics, but if anybody needs help at any time, you could always contact me and I'd be happy to help you with anything.
And Tanya, let me just reinforce what you just said. By creating the rubric within Canvas, then as your students submit, you can automatically go right into the rubric. The rubric comes up with the submission, so you can go in and post the grades right there. The downside for that is if you have a rubric that you are using, you have to cut and paste the items into the columns and the sections in the Canvas rubric. You can't just upload a rubric from somewhere else and have it that be there for you to grade with.
Right. Yes, that's a great point. So yeah, so if you were to use one of these resources that I provided, you would have to copy and paste your criteria and descriptors and all that into the Canvas rubric. But it's still really helpful, I think. If you're someone who just really kind of needs a little bit of guidance and maybe some more ideas of what you could do with a rubric, I would definitely go and check those links out. And that is the end of my presentation. I wanted to open it up for any questions. Well, here's a nice little quote. So remember that the rubric is designed to get them there, not to punish them for a less than optimal outcome. So again, focus on the positive when you're giving the feedback to the students. Be as descriptive as possible. This is supposed to be a tool to help you in grading and help the students to succeed.
Thank you, Tanya. Beautiful. Thank you. You gave us some really good perspectives on rubrics and their value. Thanks so much. Thank you all for joining us.